I would assume most people would do just whatever they feel like they could do to sustain life, which could be uncomfortable for the person receiving all these treatments. But then regardless of the outcome, you still feel all this pain of whether you did the right thing or if you didn't advocate enough.
It almost gives the people who have to make the decisions the right to be a little angry with you if you said cut it short before they wanted to. It's not a comfortable situation to ever be in. The decision to let my dad go was one thing, but I have a daughter, and the thought of having to make these decisions for her shocks me to my core, even thinking about it. I know I would go to the end of the earth to keep my daughter going, and to my detriment. So anybody who can make these documents, I really urge to do it, because it is giving your wishes, but it is giving probably one of the biggest gifts you can to another person.
Attorney Liz Nolan, Nolan Law, we're back with another Saturday State of Mind, and we're going into her crypt, all things that are estate planning related. Thrilled to be joined by you here again, Liz. Not too long ago, this is kind of an annual thing. Me and some other college buddies, we get together for dinner. We go to a steakhouse or something because everybody's in town visiting family. And this past year, I don't know who started it, but everyone started going around the table, kind of reciting all their new and latest and greatest medical maladies. And I kind of wanted just to like slide out of my chair and disappear because, I was like, guys, hey, we're getting together to, unwind a little bit, de-stress. But I think for some people, this is a big stress for them, and they were trying to vent a little bit and try to find some camaraderie. Are you dealing with something similar? But I guess now that I'm just at that age where conversation's going to be dominated by medical stuff, right? And I bring this up because I think it's a great segue into today's topic. We've been having conversations about estate planning, and I think that when you say those words, estate planning, instantly people think of death. They think of wills, they think of trusts, they think of what happens with their families when they're in the great beyond. But that's only part of the story. Arguably, half of estate planning is what happens to your stuff after you're gone. And the other arguable half is what happens to you while living, but if you're having challenges navigating the orchestration of your stuff or your assets, decisions in the hospital and similar. So today I would love to unpack that realm because I feel like it's really underexplored, and we could help a lot of people here by talking to them about what they should know when it comes to estate planning and all things medical related. So where should we start here?
So first, that sounds like a pretty morbid dinner conversation, and that's how you know you're getting into your middle-aged years, and it's only going to go from there.
We had to order a couple more drinks to loosen some people up more and get beyond that stuff, but it's telling that you get to a place in time. First, it was talking about the kids. We all have, like most of us have had we'd have talking about young kids, but now that the kids are like kind of settled, it's all about like what hurts and what's breaking down, and things ain't like they used to be.
Jiu-jitsu class is hitting a little harder than it did maybe 10 years ago or so.
Yeah. Exactly. And we've talked too about how a lot of our lives have changed post-COVID.
Yes.
People had a lot of issues with that. Some people have lingering issues with this. And so whether you're 65 or 45, I think people are paying a little bit more attention to all things medical.
Yes.
And rightfully so. But I think a lot of times when we talk about the things that are medical, we're talking about the supplements that we're taking or, the new gym that we're checking out. But what about the documents that we have in place to protect our families? What are the medical documents that you feel like people need to get started with prudent estate planning in this capacity?
So there's a lot of different medical documents. And for purposes of our conversation today, I'm not going to focus on any of the financial ones because probably better than anyone that medical events are one of the biggest unforeseen drains of people's money. And that's its own topic. But with regard to simple medical documents, in the state of New Hampshire, the really big one is the Advance Directive, which is the document that kicks in when you have legally lost capacity and really is the document that speaks when you can't any longer. It designates a person who will make your medical decisions for you, called your agent. And this is a state form, like it's derived straight from the statute. It does give some option to make additional instructions. And all of the clients that I work with, they know I feel very passionately about not only them making decisions of when they want treatment, but being really clear with when they want medical treatment to stop. So in the advance directive, I go through a lot of really delicate situations with my clients where they put down really specific triggers of when they don't want medical treatment any longer, including feeding tubes, IV fluids, all of that. We get into concepts of organ and tissue donation, the right to object to treatment, even when you're incapacitated. So it's a really interesting document. And the second part of the advance directive is the living will, which is the client's probably number one most familiar medical document, because anyone really who's gone into a hospital gets asked, do you have a living will? And that's just more or less a statement of when you're at the end of your life and it's not going to get any better. Again, when do you want that treatment to stop? So first big one is the advance directive. If there was one document I could pick every person in New Hampshire to do, it would be the advance directive. Then I do some other little documents that go along with that. Just for personal reasons, one of my biggest fears is to have dementia or Alzheimer's, just from watching family members go through that. So I make a voluntary dementia directive for my clients, which articulate when they would get treatment in that kind of situation as well. And then I do the classic standalone HIPAA waiver. Most people are really familiar with HIPAA waivers, which give the authorization to people to see and disclose your personally identifiable medical information, because all of that medical information is really protected by law. And then the final document I do, this is where we step our toe into the world of death, is the final disposition. I ask clients after they've passed away, do they have a preference on cremation, burial, and any post-death arrangements like a funeral, memorial service, or anything to that effect.
Organ donation.
Yeah, that I pop into their living will, but the two come together because obviously organ donation can have an impact on what that end of life celebration looks like.
So I heard about the directive. There's a couple ancillary directives that you throw in there as well, the living will. If we could unpack a little bit how these documents protect people, how would you best articulate how these are serving to protect you?
They protect the client because they actually lay out when somebody wants medical treatment to stop. And again, I'm pretty fixated on that standard of when medical treatment stops. My dad died a few years ago after having a series of strokes. And unfortunately, all the way up until the end, his mind was there. So he knew what was going on. But as a person, he was really unhappy. And he never made any of these documents, even though I was a lawyer at the time. He named me as the person to make decisions for him. I had no guidance on when he wanted things to end. What I knew was what he told me when I was growing up, of he didn't want to be in a situation where he wasn't himself anymore, if I could sum it up in a couple of words. And so it protects the clients because they actually get to put that down on paper. I remembered it in the emergency situation of what my dad wanted, but a lot of people don't. And that's a very human reaction to having your parent dying right in front of you. So it protects the client because they're able to say, this is when I want treatment to stop, and they're not pushed past that point. But it also clearly protects the people who are making the decisions for you. I will have to live the rest of my life with the decisions that I've made, and I'm fine with that because the decisions I made were the best I could at the time. But I also know there are a lot of people I work with who will say they wonder if they pulled the plug too early, too late, if they didn't do enough. And the thought of living with that guilt for the rest of your life is very intense. So these documents, yes, they're for you, but they're also for the people who actually have to do really hard things. And that can cause lifelong guilt and other just like mental repercussions.
Yeah, I think a lot of times people focus on like, this is going to protect me. It makes sure that my wishes are honored.
Yeah.
But I love how it unburdens the people
It does.
I have never been in this situation, and I hope to never be in this situation, at least not that often.
Yeah.
And it seems like anybody, even the coolest person, would have to be experiencing some amount of extreme either stress or in the aftermath guilt, because absent directive, I would assume most people would do just whatever they feel like they could do to
Exactly.
sustain life, which could be uncomfortable for the person receiving all these treatments. But then, regardless of the outcome, especially since in a lot of these situations they end in demise, you still feel all this pain of whether you did the
Yes.
right thing or if you didn't advocate enough. I mean, I think that when you provide guidance to people, it gives them a more narrow path to walk,
Yes.
which allows for less kind of just, I don't know, inner dialogue going all over the place. Does that make sense?
Exactly. And it almost gives the people who have to make the decisions the right to be a little angry with you if you said cut it short before they wanted to. It's not a comfortable situation to ever be in. But like we're discussing, it's almost like you and I are imagining this is a child making decisions for their parents. And that, of course, we hope is the natural order of things. But there are terrible situations where parents have to make those decisions for their children. So as soon as someone is 18, they are legally allowed to start making these documents on their own. And the decision to let my dad go was one thing. But I have a daughter, and the thought of having to make these decisions for her shocks me to my core, even thinking about it. I'm a very superstitious person. I don't even want to think about that. But if you can give your parents that peace of mind that you laid this out too, I know I would go to the end of the earth to keep my daughter going, and to my detriment. So anybody who can make these documents, I really urge to do it, because it is giving your wishes, but it is giving probably one of the biggest gifts you can to another person.
Absolutely. I'd love to explore for a second what happens in the absence of these directives. Now, we have people watching probably from all over the world, certainly all over the country.
Yes.
Being more specific, or you know what, taking a generalistic approach, right?
Yeah.
Things can absolutely differ state to state.
Yes.
But in the general, Liz, what happens to people if they don't have these directives in hand?
There usually, again, generally speaking, there is going to be some state regulation, some statute that's going to come in to say, okay, this person is in this emergency situation, so this is who their agent's going to be, whether it's a spouse, a parent, whoever. But I think what's really important to remember is when we're in those situations, every second counts. It's not just every minute counts, every second counts. And so if we don't have a clear idea of who that agent needs to be, we are literally wasting very valuable time.
Why is in some cases does administration step in and put a pause on things until there's clarity around who can do what and under?
It can potentially, but at the same time, when an advance directive is kicked in, it is because someone is legally incapacitated. That's actually a pretty high standard to get to. And so that person is probably in a hospital. Now you are requiring doctors to kind of start making decisions. And I have a lot of sympathy for doctors. They are really confined with the fear of being legally prosecuted for decisions that they make, maybe in a really emergency situation. And so there's just a whole lot of different intricacies involved with this. Obviously, nothing legal can ever be simple, but these documents help, even though they are long. Of course, nothing I do can ever be that simple, but it at least helps the process go a little bit faster, because when an emergency arises, we don't have time to waste. We don't have time for a hearing. We need to be able to make action immediately.
This is complicated stuff, Liz.
It is.
This is good job security for you.
Yes.
Are there any myths as related to medical planning that you'd like to dispel here today?
I think the biggest myth that I come across is it's really people thinking they don't need it. They automatically assume their spouse is their agent or their parents are their agent, but that isn't always the case. So just don't rely on what you think is going to happen.
Your
Take
spouse
control.
or your parents, I have to imagine too, probably aren't always your best options.
Exactly.
Even if they're the people on deck to legally assist you.
Exactly. Like I was giving the reference to my daughter before. I mean, the thought of my mom making my medical decisions, she would prop me up for as long as possible. She would not be able to accept that this was the end
Tubes
for
and
Liz.
fluids, all of it.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
And she would be, doing the most. I love her so much. She's such a wonderful woman, but she is not the person that I could entrust to make medical decisions because she doesn't have that in her to let me go. So I think biggest myth is that it's really going to all be taken care of for you, that you don't need to make these documents yourself, that something is always going to be there to dictate it for you. And I'm a big fan of people taking control over their own situation. Just do it yourself. Another myth that I find is that people think they don't need it because they don't have children or because they're not married, because they're single. They think that their status makes them quote unquote simple. But I think it's important for everyone to remember that most of us have people in our lives that really love us, friends, family, everyone. They really care. And it's going to cause a huge emotional burden for those people if you don't make those documents.
Well, I'm a little bit worried for those people just for this reason. Let's suppose that you are unmarried and maybe your parents are gone. Maybe your lineup of friends and others is a little bit more shallow than, say, the average person's. Doesn't the state then step in a lot of those situations or have a hospital administrator decide for you? That to me is scarier than putting some documents or some planning in place.
And that really depends, again, on where you are, your specific situation. But it's happened that people who you don't know end up making decisions for you. And I'm sure that really isn't what most people want. Maybe for some it is, but for most, they'd rather have someone they love being the one to be their voice when they can't talk for themselves.
I would say even if you have a big lineup of people to choose from to represent you or it's a smaller one, I don't think a lot of people can even appreciate, unless you've been in a hospital a lot, either on for your own reasons or helping somebody else out, what could possibly happen. So like I'll use myself as an example. Despite what probably people think about my background, I haven't been in a hospital very much. I'm kind of a clumsy person, but I've stayed on my own 2 feet often enough to not have to go to the ER, or I haven't had, like, knocking on wood here, many medical issues. But I'm sure all sorts of different things can happen. I think that in this capacity, we think of just like, I'm in a coma, so now I need somebody to represent me. But there's probably all sorts of cancer treatments that might temporarily put me out of commission where things need to be done. Trauma, certainly if I'm in a car accident, I'm temporarily out because I'm under sedation. People have to step in. I think there's value just in having this conversation where somebody, say with your experience, can walk through all the various scenarios, because I'm sure that when you're drawing up that directive, half of the different scenarios that I might experience, I probably couldn't imagine on my own.
Exactly. And that's definitely my job to think of the worst case scenarios. But even if we take married couples as an example, it's very default for a spouse to name their spouse as their agent to make all medical decisions for them. But when you're married to someone, you tend to be in a car with them a lot when you're going out. And we know car accidents are one of the leading causes of death in this country. And so, God forbid, you are in an accident with your spouse at the same time. You're both knocked out. You're both incapacitated. You need someone else on that lineup who can come in and make decisions for you. And you don't have to pick the same people. You don't have to throw that burden just on one person for both spouses. You can separate it. It can be a friend. It can be kids. You can even pick one kid for one parent, one for the other, to try and break out the obligations. But you can also name co-agents, which I'm a big fan of too.
Okay. That way there's some collaboration that happens.
The more we can bring people together in really sad times, the more they'll be able to help each other. And it can actually, this sounds weird, but it can build really strong, long-lasting relationships with those siblings.
Sure. I like the idea of just having a committee that has to decide on my fate. I know there's people that are out there looking to cut a corner or save a buck. They might be thinking, can I put together a DIY plan or just contact the hospital and use their forms just to skip the attorneys and all the fees? Is that a viable solution, or would you plaster any warnings against any of that DIY type stuff?
In my experience, and to the best of my knowledge, the vast majority of, especially hospitals, will have their own versions of the living will. Usually they'll even have the entire advance directive, which nominates the agent and has the living will combined. That is a very legal option to do. It's not what I would prefer to do because, again, it's naming who makes the decisions for you, and it's cutting off treatment when there's really generally no reasonable hope of your benefit at the very end of your life. But what it fails to do is address the intricacies of what happens right up to the point where the hospital sees no reason to keep you going any longer. Every single client that I meet has a very different opinion on death and dying. And it's a really interesting concept in and of itself. But a lot of clients that I meet with, they don't want to have to, quote unquote, limp along to the very end. They would rather be able to pass before that happens. So if you DIY it, you kind of lose out sometimes on being able to make those really specific modifications that I spend a lot of time with clients doing. So I would at least suggest consulting with a really good estate planning attorney to try and make this as custom of a document as possible. Again, if there's one I could pick for everyone to do, it would be the medical. So if you're doing it, do it. Don't just dip your toe in. Make it a big, thick, meaty document that deals with every scenario, just because this is the one that people are going to pretty much be very likely to have to use.
Okay. Yeah. So the DIY stuff, it sounds like it's better than nothing, but it's going to be
Definitely
short on all the
better
depth.
than nothing, but it's just not going to be as custom as you have the right to make it.
Winding things down here, Liz, you've been very good in kind of wrapping these episodes up with pieces of advice for the
Yes.
people as it relates to medical planning. Would you say that there's maybe 3 pieces of advice that you'd like to share?
Absolutely. And out of all of the documents I do, these are definitely the most sensitive. So my pieces of advice are probably going to feel pretty uncomfortable for people. But first, I would say the best piece of advice is for you as a person to actually know when you do not want medical treatment any longer. What is the point in your life where you're done and you don't want to keep going on any longer? And then the second piece of advice would be figure out who you want making medical decisions for you and be very honest with yourself of who in your life has the ability and constitution to actually do it. I'm one of 3, and of the 3 children my dad had, I was the youngest, but I was the one who could deal with it. My siblings can't the way that I can. So just being really honest with who a good candidate is for that position. And it's not, it sounds like it's a gift naming someone as this person of great prestige, but in reality, it is a burden. So keeping that in mind. And then the last thing I would say is really utilize your ability to make these as custom as possible. Don't take a shortcut. You're already in a very uncomfortable place when you're thinking about all of this. If you're going to do it really well. So that way you only have to do it once and you don't have to revisit it again.
This is great advice. I think medical planning is definitely a little bit on the scary and intimidating side, but I'd much rather have a plan in place than go through a health event with nothing at all. So I think that Liz's advice here is fantastic. Like and subscribe if you want to hear Liz and I riff on other estate planning topics, and join us next time for our next chat as we go, I think for the first time, deep into the crypt and talk about an estate planning horror story. We'll see you then.
If you liked this video and it helped you, watch another one and don't forget to hit subscribe.